So we're at the hour, and a lot of your questions, viewers, are answered in part one I did with John, which I'm going to play now because I know most of you haven't seen it, and we're going to let John get going.
I look like I've grown a bit taller since then.
I've grown hairier. And is there anything you'd like to say in conclusion, John, before I play part one? It's 45 minutes long, I think.
I don't have to watch it, do I?
No. Is there anything you'd like to say in conclusion to the viewers presently?
No, I really appreciate people are still interested in the case, and I really appreciate that. I really, really, really love doing my job. I love doing investigative journalism. I'm not scared of some of the implications it brings, the kind of craziness that I've had to put up with over the years. And I believe there's some dangers in investigative journalists. If certainly if you were in Russia, or if you were trying to get into Gaza, or wherever, the people who are trying to expose what's happening around the world, I just hope that people value what we try and do and somehow support us in what we do, because it's painstaking and it takes time. And I'm not going to suggest for a second it's as hard or details with a police detective job. And of course, there'll always be mistakes we make as journalists and errors and time differences and things, but it's just a body of work, and you just have to keep digging away and digging away and digging away and digging away. And eventually, I hope we get to the end of the line.
Yeah, and if you want to terrify yourself, viewers, with how scary the network was and of these PDFs in Portugal at that time, definitely grab John's book, very well researched. And you would never take a child on holiday there after reading John's book. It really hit me in the guts. And what can people look forward to at your website?
I mean, well, actually, the Olive Press published yesterday an exclusive story about how Christian, unbeknown to The Sun and Channel 4, was actually going to go on trial again next week. So anyone interested in this case will see Mr. Brueckner going to court in a small court called Leyte, which is near the prison Sende, where he's been abusing and attacking prison officers, and he's accused of that. And Olive Press, we've been leading the way on the stories in the McCann case, largely because it's across the road in Portugal, but also because there's been so many cases in Spain, links and connections that he made to Spain. In particular, that crash we saw earlier was in Spain. His many visits to Spain, a lot of his friends based in Spain. So we've been following it right from the beginning. Olive Press is, I think it's the main British English newspaper for expats who live in Spain, and we try and do stuff that people need to know about, and that's it in a nutshell.
And people can find your podcast through your webpage.
Yeah, we're launching a podcast. There we go. Exciting. Yeah, did our first one yesterday. It'll be out soon. It won't be as slick as this though, Shaun, but we'll get there, I hope.
Oh, thank you for spending time with us, my friend.
Thanks.
We wish you all the best in your endeavors, and you take care. Cheers, John.
Thanks very much, Shaun. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Paul. Bye-bye. All right, viewers, like I said, there's still several questions outstanding, but I do believe they were answered in part one that I did with John. So, yeah, look at me. Jen's laughing at me looking young and unshaven in this video, pre-Ziggy. So, without any further ado, I'm going to play this for you. It's 47 minutes long, and we've also got some other McCann guests. And we've also got our David Icke on McCann video almost ready to relaunch. So we're going to have much more McCann stuff in the next couple of days. But here you go with part one with John. Let me play this. The case isn't dead. It isn't leaving Braunschweig Court. It's going to rumble on. But we just try and correct what's out there and try and do it as clearly and correctly as possible. There's a lot of clickbait out there. We've got a paywall now, so we just want quality people who sign up to us and use us. So it's not about sensational journalism and trying to get people just to watch, to read stuff. We want people to want to read it and read it for a reason. So we did something about Maddie's being 18. That seemed appropriate. But yeah, I find it amazing that that you'll have a story in say the Mirror or the Sun or the Mail, and within an hour it's in all the other papers and the Star just regurgitated, and just think. But yeah, that was a remarkably odd case, wasn't it? That girl, she's a strange girl, wasn't she?
All right, many of the viewers requested that we get John on, and John's book is My Search for Madeleine, one reporter's 14-year hunt to solve Europe's most harrowing crime. John is spelled Jon, and it's Clarke, Clarke. All of John's links are in the description box below this video if you want to follow up and get his book. And we've never had John on the channel before, so this is going to be a unique opportunity to get another side to this story that just never leaves the news headlines. So, John, huge thank you for coming on. And firstly, what got you interested in the McCann case?
Well, I can tell you it's actually 16 years now. It was 14, that's 16, or going into 16 years. And what got me interested in the case was just literally a very early morning phone call told from a foreign desk flunky to just get my arse down to Portugal as quickly as possible and cover a story that seemed pretty low key and pretty minor, but to him it seemed quite important. I think by nature of the fact it could have been a doctor and she could have been blonde and had blue eyes. So that was me, slightly cynical, slightly early in the morning, slightly tired, getting in the car and driving all the way from where I lived at the time in Ronda all the way to southern Portugal, to Pradeluz for my first visit there. And so that's what got me interested. And from that day, I've kind of always covered the case. And always.
When did you notice that this was not a run-of-the-mill disappearance case?
Well, probably, that's a good question. Probably around halfway through that day, I'd say, it began to become a bit like, oh, she's not going to turn up. She's not going to just sort of wander back. We haven't found her body. And I've been like all around that bloody area, all around Pradeluz, you know, every single back street off into the country and talked to everyone I could. And I think probably by mid-afternoon, late afternoon, I thought, no, this is likely to have been a snatch. And, you know, by the time of the press conference that evening, when they famously came out of the apartment and gave their press conference at the steps of the Ocean Club, you could sense their despair. It was exactly 24 hours later. And I don't know if it was timed almost to the moment that Maddie had got missing. It was around 9:15, 9:30 that night. And it must have been almost exactly that time that Maddie had been taken. And they were just distraught. They were, you know, you could sense it. It was just, you know, the atmosphere, you cut with a knife. And it's not, at that point, there's not much you can do. It was on the news, it was on the national news. So there wasn't that much for me to do apart from just to sort of take some pics and listen in and try and get a few pointers. And, you know, I wasn't a crime journalist. I was just a general news journalist, but I had done a lot of crime reporting back in London and in Spain, of course, a lot of crime down here. And so I just sort of stuck around for a few days then and did my best to try and understand as best as possible what had happened. And it was just, you know, I then went back for my daughter's birthday, which was quite moving. She was very young at the time, and then came back out again a couple of days later, or in fact the day after, and then was there for another week more or less, and backwards and forwards really for the first month or two. So yeah, I did lots of reporting on it live in the resort and got to know all the journalists from the very beginning who were covering it. A lot who at the time knew the case much better than me because they were living and breathing it 24/7. But because I'm more of a sort of Sunday news reporter, more, you know, I guess you'd probably say I like following a more exclusive beat, separate beat. I could go off on angles and leads that maybe perhaps the other guys weren't going on because they had to just sort of follow the other sort of daily news agenda. So someone at the Telegraph would have to make sure they followed someone at the Mail, had to follow someone at the Sun. I could be, because I was working for the Mail on Sunday, the Sunday Mirror, I was able to sort of go off a little bit off diary and start digging into stuff that perhaps they didn't. And of course, a lot of them were sent home and then brought other journalists out. So they lost that continuity. But because I've always been in Spain, and because there were so many links to Spain, and it's probably highly likely that Madeleine did come across the border at some point. And because, you know, there's so many stories broke in Spain afterwards, I covered most of those, and we broke a load of our own stories as well, so-called sightings and claims of this and that. So I kept a really close interest in it over the years. And, you know, I always thought I should probably write a book on it, and never did. Wrote another crime book that sold pretty well right at the beginning, and then did a restaurant book, slightly different. And then when suddenly out of the blue, you know, they announced that they had a German suspect a couple of years ago, I got straight on that. I just got onto the Mail on Sunday news desk and just said, look, you know, do you want me on this? And it was in the lockdown, and so they were just delighted I could get straight over there and before anyone else, and really, you know, muscle in on it. And at that point I thought that, you know, this is perhaps the time I should write a book on it. And so I just sort of immersed myself for a year and a half, really just pulling it all together. And I've, you know, I'm going to do a second edition of it fairly soon. There's going to be another edition, and it'll be up, and it'll be very different to the first. It's going to be a lot of new stuff. The case, as you probably know, keeps moving and changing, and you know, I know you've covered it a fair bit. I've seen your name. I've tried to contact you, Shaun, a couple of times. I think we've got mixed up through Donald, a mutual friend, Donald McIntyre. And I know you've been talking to people on the case quite a lot, haven't you? You know, so, you know, it's, and you know, someone gave me a blank check. I could probably go to 10 different doorsteps, 10 different areas tomorrow over the next month and carry on digging. But unfortunately, I haven't got the deepest pockets. I can't keep. So I have to sort of wait for the right moment to kind of go off and do my reporting and do my digging. But I think we're getting close. I think we're getting close to solving the case.
All right, well, let's go over this much more slowly then. So on the day in question, would you say there was hope early on and the atmosphere changed?
I'd say there was hope initially, yeah. I certainly hoped, certainly. But yeah, I think it became quite apparent early on that you know, that she had been taken. But I think what was interesting was the press conference we had in Portimao a few days later, where the chief of police said, "Oh, look, we know who's taken her," because then they were saying, "Well, it was a kidnapping. We know who's taken her, and she's within," he said, to quote, 3 kilometers, or was it 3 miles of Pradalou. So we thought, I mean, what's that all about? How do they know this? And so there was a sort of hope that perhaps she was alive, and that you know, we were going to get back. So there was some hope amid the gloom.
Did you ever find out the basis for them saying that?
No, never found out. Never found out. And I don't know, but as you well know, Shaun, there's a couple of interesting policemen who are linked to this case, fairly senior policemen, one who became one of the most senior, I would say, establishment figures in Portugal, certainly the top 100 key figures in Portugal, who's currently in prison and will be in prison for 7 to 8 years.
Who's that?
A guy called Cristóvão Pereira. He was the deputy of Gonçalo Amaral in the Algarve, and he worked on other missing children's cases, and has spoken a lot about Madeleine McCann, has written a book on Madeleine McCann, and became the president of the Missing Persons Bureau in Portugal, the Missing Children's Bureau, no less, not even Missing Persons, Missing Children's Bureau in Portugal. Then became the president of Sporting Lisbon, and then got accused then of corruption while at Sporting Lisbon, and then got found guilty of running a crime gang that kidnapped families and children in Lisbon and in Sintra, and is found guilty of running this gang, and is now in prison for it, thankfully. I know
he was in charge of investigating these matters that he was committing.
The police over there did, and I can tell you that what's particularly interesting is his connections to sort of the Knights Templar and Opus Dei and shady,
oh my goodness, please tell us all about that. I'm getting goosebumps.
Well, you can write it. There's a bit in my first book. There'll be a lot more in the second book, but I have to be very careful when I go across the border, because I don't want to get picked up as I go into Portugal. So I don't know if any of them are going to watch this podcast, but you know, I think, am I right in saying you've been down to Orchiva even at one point? Have you been down to the Alpujarras in Granada, or do you talk to people, didn't you, on your show who were in the Alpujarras?
So we've interviewed Mark Williams Thomas, who was out there quite fast. We've interviewed John Wedger, ex-London Met cop. We've interviewed David Icke. We've interviewed Sonia Poulton. So we've had a range of viewpoints, from abduction to some kind of abuse ring.
Yeah, the abuse
parents.
ring was interesting. That's I wanted to ask you about that. How do you see that as credible? Did you not find a woman who was based out of Auckland claimed she was trafficked at one point? Am I right in saying? Talk to someone.
We've had every claim under the sun. The people we've interviewed have claimed everything under the sun regarding McCann. The bottom line is, it's one of those things that nobody's ever going to know unless it is solved, as you said earlier. But that's what drives perpetual interest, isn't it? It's like, who killed Epstein? Who killed JFK? These things, the public never lose interest in them because they've not been solved.
I think we are 90% or 95% to solving it. I think when the German police say we are confident that we know what happened to Maddie and that she's dead, and that the family pretty much accept that now, that I think, as I understand it, that the evidence is there. It's not the best clear-cut evidence, but it's good evidence. And there's certain bits that I can't, unfortunately, tell you about because I'm sworn secrecy, that I do know about, that are so good that, unfortunately for Mr. Brueckner, he's not going to get off. He will go to court and he will be found guilty of at least, at the very least, abduction.
Well, what was the role of Opus Dei in this? And can you explain what they are?
Well, I mean, it's more Knights Templars and Opus Dei, which is a far kind of quite shady Catholic organisation linked to the Catholic Church. And the Knights Templar were famously come out of the Crusades, when Christian crusaders came down to, fundamentally, people think they all went to Jerusalem, to fight in Jerusalem during the Crusades. But actually, the Crusades were very much linked as well to Spain and Portugal, because from 711 up to 1492, Spain and Portugal and bits of France were ruled by the Moors, the Moorish kingdoms. So it was traditionally kind of important that Catholics, Protestants, knights came down to fight the Arabs in Spain. And so these organizations are celebrated. And I can tell you now that some of the key police figures and establishment figures in Portugal are members of these slightly shady groups. And as you probably know, Portugal has a very bad track record for networks and rings. And at the time of Maddie going missing, there was an extremely serious investigation that had been first seen the light of day 30 years earlier, then been pushed down, and it came up again 20 years earlier and been squashed again, and finally had been brought forward thanks to the amazing work of one of those abused, who became a lawyer, who was just so bloody minded and insisted it had to come out. And that case, believe it or not, at the time of Madeleine going missing, you could still sit in a cafe in Lisbon with your laptop open and look at pornography legally. But in 2008 and 2009, the court finally came to court, and various senior establishment figures, well over 30, were found guilty, although only, I think, 12 or 13 went to prison. But that included lawyers, TV personalities, doctors, a huge retinue of very senior establishment figures in Portugal. There was even claims that the Prime Minister at the time was linked to it, even one of the opposition leaders, lots of stuff in the press of the counter-suing. So this problem existed. And it's fair to say, would you not agree, that if the lawyers and the medical profession and the judiciary are involved, it's probably likely that the police force is also involved in some way. Some members of them are involved. I think it'd be naive to say, oh no, the police wasn't the police force. I'd be very naive. I'm not blaming. I'm not pointing a finger at anyone here, Shaun. But there've been some cover-ups, and there's been a lot of conjecture about exactly how closely some of the police were involved in this case, how much covering up went on, and some of the linked cases, such as the current case of Hazel Bean, as she usually say it in Irish, Behan, you may know it there, but Hazel Bean, who was...
I hope you're enjoying the podcast. I've got some exciting news to announce. Michael Franzese is coming back to tour the UK in 2024. The Remade Man Tour, the Michael Franzese story. Michael Franzese, once named one of the 50 most significant mob bosses in the USA by Fortune magazine, and a former member of the notorious Colombo crime family, will take you deep into the world of organized crime, sharing captivating tales and insights into the mafia's past, present, and future. Join us for